Happy Wednesday, New Orleans Saints Nation, and a special happy night to all of our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is doing well out there. I especially hope your families are doing well too. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your many co-hosts for the Bayou Blitz podcast tonight for a special Bayou Blitz podcast. It's our 2023 NFL Draft Preview. Joining me, as always, is my co-host Brendan Boylan and our boss at the Saints News Network, one of many faces that are going to be popping in tonight, Kyle T. Mosley. Mr. Mosley, I know you have been making your rounds throughout Football Nation. I'm just glad you took some time out of your busy schedule to rejoin your roots at the Bayou Blitz.
Look, man, first of all, thank you guys for having me. And it's a special night for me because think about this. I started Saints News Radio 13 seasons ago. And now it's evolving to the Bayou Blitz, and you and Brendan are doing a fantastic job just doing what you guys do well in educating the public on what's happening with the New Orleans Saints in the National Football League. So to see where we were when Curtis and I started with the snap, crackle, and pops, and it was just all terrible, and all we had was that Block Talk Radio as our host account at that time. And to see how it's grown now and with the video and what you guys are doing, it's just great for me. I feel like an old papa just relishing in the accolades and honors that what you guys are doing. And a lot of people are taking notice of you guys. I see what you guys are doing. I love it. And keep up the great work, Brendan and Bob. Keep it up.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate all of it, man. We were talking about it not long ago. Like, Bob and I, we've been preparing obviously this show and the next week with the draft. Bob and I are going on year 4. Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 of doing draft coverage together.
Yep.
And then obviously, I started with Saints News when I was in college, so we're getting close to like 7 or 8 years hanging out with you guys. So, long time friendship, and still happy to be able to contribute and talk about the New Orleans Saints and all the fun parts of the NFL draft. And I know obviously with you and HBCUs, you got plenty of guys that you're highlighting and profiling, looking at. Bob is highlighting and profiling every offensive player in the world that is eligible for the draft. And then I got my small school kids too. Even a Gardner Webb guy is had 4 or 5 meetings this week. So always good to see some of the small school kids get some recognition. But nonetheless, just another NFL draft, and I feel like the last few, Bob, we've had some surprises, right? You look back at what the Saints have done in the first round, talk Peyton Turner and Cesar Ruiz in particular, were some shocks in the first round. We'll see what the Saints have for us this year.
And I'll tell you, I expect the Saints to pull some surprises like they do every year, guys. In the last few years that we've been doing draft coverage, with each other, live throughout all of round 1, throughout most of day 2, and in and out through day 3. If we could have had some screenshots at all of our facial expressions over the years at certain picks. I'm not mentioning any names, but they rhyme with Sluiz and Ferner. So some of the screenshots of our facial expressions could have sent us down in infamy for sure.
Yeah, look, I remember when they chose Vaccaro. We're like, where'd that come from? So yeah, Mickey Loomis and those guys usually have their guys that they like to choose, and I know with Sean Payton it was the size, the length, the height, the quickness of the person. That was pretty much the pattern. And I don't believe that Dennis Allen is going to stray anywhere from that type of pattern as well. But what I do believe is, like you said, there could be a shot, and there could be an instance where the Saints feel as though they may have to go up into the draft to get a guy that they really, really like. And so, hey, surprises are nothing new for the New Orleans Saints. So Who Dat Nation, just hang on for the ride.
Bob, I'll ask you this because you've been profiling some of these offensive guys. So let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room, right? The New Orleans Saints finally, get their franchise quarterback guy in Derek Carr during the offseason, but there's been some ties and some rumors with one quarterback in particular in Knoxville, in Hendon Hooker. Between the two of you, and as we welcome in our friend John Hendricks, what's the rumblings with Hendon Hooker potentially being a New Orleans Saint? Do any of you guys see that being a possibility? As we welcome John in once again.
Well, yeah, I'll jump in on it first if it's all right, guys. I love Hendon Hooker. I have since day one. And the Saints, as you guys all know, as many of our followers know, the Saints had one of their official visits. Each team is allotted 30 visits with draft prospects, and one of those visits was with Hendon Hooker. I think that they're just doing their due diligence. A lot of us felt like once Derek Carr was signed, that took the first-round possibility of drafting a quarterback off the table. But I'll tell you, I think if Hendon Hooker is sitting there at 29 and some of their other draft, none of us are privy to Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen's exact draft board. But if some of those top names are gone and they have a chance to grab a quarterback in the first round, and the difference between a first round quarterback and any other round, of course, not only are you on a rookie contract, but you have that very, very valuable fifth-year option. Derek Carr is really, I know the length of the contract, what the length of the contract is, but that $100 million, they have an out after year 2 or year 3. If Derek doesn't play well. And if that happened, none of us think it's going to happen, but you never know. And if it does, it'd be awfully nice to have a young quarterback sitting there waiting in the wings. I don't think that it'll happen, but if Hendon Hooker is sitting there at 29, that's going to be awfully tough for this team to pass up.
Well, I can jump in on the sword too, and sorry for being a couple minutes late, guys. I appreciate it as always. Good to be on and reunited with the team, obviously. So here's what I'd say about Hendon Hooker. There's a scenario in my head that I could see this working. Like on the surface, I'm going to say no, right? Even if he's there at 29, just because you have the best insurance policy in Jameis Winston, backing up Derek Carr. This is going to be Derek Carr offense is to run. I think he's going to do extremely well, Pete Carmichael. But here's my kind of vision for it. Let's say since Jameis is on a 1-year deal, we know that training camp's going to be a more heightened focus. The pressure's off of him. He's not coming in to start, right? He can do extremely well in the preseason. Team gets hurt at the quarterback spot. You got a veteran that can step in. Maybe you trade somebody like a Winston to a team that needs a quarterback. And if you had a Hendon Hooker or somebody like that is in waiting, I could see that making a little bit more sense to me. I think, for Jameis, and look, Kyle talked to him too, and he could probably piggyback off this too, but just the fact that Jameis is really focused on getting healthy right now, and then he's going to be the best version of himself. He's a consummate teammate. I think there's a chance for him to start down the line, but, if they were to say go to 29, draft Hooker, I think that's got to be something that's in their back pocket maybe to think about. That's my crazy off the wall. Here's where you would take Hendon Hooker and why that would make sense.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. But I tell you this much, man. I was looking at a quote from Jim Nagy over the Senior Bowl, and he was talking about how the defensive tackles are pretty thin this year. And, the Saints really need to have somebody in that rotation who's young, who they can be able to groom. I know we have Malcolm Roach, and I know they had the 2 off-season signings, but do we have an impact player? Do we have a guy that's going to really be that star of the group like David Amata was? I don't think so right now. I think we have good serviceable guys, but if you have a guy like, what's his name, Breesy, you have a guy like Mozzie Smith that's available, I think you have to be able to think that's the logical choices for the Saints. Or if there's a defensive end that they love that falls to them, they will go that route as well. Hooker, if he falls, let's say if he falls out of the first round into the second round, could the Saints decide to kind of jump up into the second round at a higher spot to land Hooker. That's a possibility as well. They also had a visit with, Thompson Robinson out of UCLA. He's a great dual threat type of person. I think, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You were at the Senior Bowl, but Jeff Ireland did stress the fact that they would like to have a dual threat quarterback. Taysom Hill's 32 years old, still fast, still strong, but he was a little banged up last season. I think it makes sense to be able to get somebody who's young. You can be able to groom if you have somebody you trust. And those two guys are the ones that people most likely would trust and will be available once the Saints are trying to pick either in the first round or the second round.
Yeah, just to say
or later
that,
rounds. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, RC, Ron Curry, man, I think he's very underrated. I think he's going to get some real major looks next offseason. But, man, I think he's just great at what he does. And for this quarterback situation, somebody to come in and work with him, I mean, he has a wealth of knowledge, obviously. But you mentioned Taysom Hill. So one of the things they picked up and, at the Combine is the Saints feel like they have a better understanding of how to use him best going forward this season. I don't know if that encompasses the tight end spot. I don't know how much it encompasses the quarterback spot. Obviously, there's going to be a shared role in what he does with the quarterback powers, all these different things. I think that remains to be seen, obviously. But, you mentioned Thompson Robinson, and going back to what Jeff Ireland talked about at the Senior Bowl and told us is, look, he says he likes and prefers, the dual threat quarterback. But here's the thing about him is they got to be able to throw when they can't run, right? And that's the thing that I think is a knock on Thompson Robinson, is he's got to develop a little bit there. He kind of gets rattled a little bit in the pocket, but look, he's a day 3 guy. And so when you get in the 6th round or 7th round, if you get a pick on somebody like that, I don't think that's a bad thing for sure. But, look, the Saints are in a space where presumably, Derek Carr, he doesn't have to come in here and be a hero. He doesn't have to come in here and be Drew Brees. He just needs to be good. I mean, you look at last year, the Saints defense, last 8 games, 20 points or less, right? And they won half of those. That just can't sit with anybody. Like, could you imagine if Drew was here and he had 8 straight games with 20 and he couldn't put up 21? I mean, it just doesn't make sense, right? And so I just feel like there's a vision. And Ireland also said this too. If they're going to draft a quarterback prospect, it's got to be all in or nothing. So if there's anybody that's got a wavering opinion in that room that doesn't want to draft a quarterback prospect, they're not going to take him. So we'll see. But I think they're going to be happy with Derek, and he's going to make a good impact on this team.
Yeah, I agree. As far as a lot of other analysts, they believe Hooker is the best choice out of everybody who's available. The injury, the ACL injury, of course, sets him back a little bit. And that does give them some time to be able to work with him, groom him as well, if they decide to work with him and choose him at that spot. But I think right now the Saints have so many other needs, and I think the more pressing needs would be either defensive end or defensive tackle.
John, Kyle, Brendan, I want to get all your thoughts on this one. Familiar faces have been the story of the Saints offseason. Dennis Allen brought in 4 or 5 coaches that he worked with. Love you, little guy. Brought in Derek Carr, the quarterback that he drafted. Saunders played with Matthew and Tano Passanio in Kansas City. Shepard played with May in New York. We could go on and on. Cody Burns, the wide receiver coach for the New Orleans Saints, going into his 2nd year. His last stop was the University of Tennessee. Now, we just got done talking about Hooker, but there's also 2 very, very good wide receivers out there. Jalen Hyatt, who the Saints met with, and Cedric Tillman, a kid that I love. Do you think that either one of those guys, not in the first round, because I think we're all in agreement that unless a big name falls to them, the Saints are going to address a more pressing need. But can either of you guys see, if a wide receiver like Jalen Hyatt and/or Cedric Tillman comes into play, maybe as early as the 2nd round, is that going to play a factor? The fact that Cody Burns is on the staff.
I'd say unequivocally yes. I mean, I do. I think the need is there, because here's the thing, and everything I've been told about this, they're not putting all their eggs in the Michael Thomas basket, right? You bring in Brian Edwards. aside Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave, every single Saints receiver is going to be a free agent in some capacity going into next year. Now, I'm not saying, and there's a lot of these situations, right? But I'm not saying that you just draft with that intention in mind, because I think Edwards can compete. Traquan, he's always been a guy that just hung around, and maybe he flourishes a little bit. Obviously, Kirk Merritt, I think, is going to give some extra eyes this time. And Thomas, he's not going to hit the field until he's 100% ready, even though, he's doing these deadlifts and getting tested by the NFL for random drug tests and all that, right? But, look, I could see it because you saw the impact that Chris Olave obviously made. We knew that was going to happen. Rashid Shaheed was an undrafted guy. He came on in. He made Deontay Hardy look obsolete. Right. Yeah. And it didn't start that way, but he came in. It's like, who is this other guy? And those are the type of things. But look, I think Hyatt and Tillman, both of those guys, I really like what they bring to the table. Hyatt, particularly, I think there's a strong argument to be made that you can take a receiver. I think, like Kyle had said earlier, I think DT is the most pressing need. I think they have to come away. If you're telling me right now I'm running to the podium, I don't care really how the board falls, unless my guy Dalton Kincaid's there at 29. I'm taking a defensive tackle at 29. 40, I think that could be a wide receiver. I just don't think a running back, even though I think running back is super rich in this class. I think they could wait to day 3 to get their running back they need, or they can just, pick 71. I think Tyjae Spears has obviously been one that's been popularly mocked, but there's guys in 6th round that you can get. They're going to be really good. There's 5th, 6th, 7th rounds that I think that can play impact on this team. But look, I would love it. The Cody Burns pipeline. Guy is super smart. He's very intelligent what he does. Every time we talk to him, the guy is just sharp as everything. I mean, it's a great hire by Dennis Allen, right? And I think the things that we don't get a lot of credit for, don't see a lot of there, with him assembling his staff, kind of what you alluded to, Bob, is that, now with DA, there's no more excuses. Him and Chris Richard had different philosophies. I'm telling you, the problem that he ran into some last year is when you're working alongside these guys for so many years, and then you become their head coach, you're going to have a different opinion. And I'm not saying there's bad blood or they didn't get along or anything like that, but differing in philosophies, DA, it's his team. He's going to run it how he sees fit. And he has his guys that are going to help support that right now.
I mean, take them, but
sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, but number one, I don't know. I don't see number one. I could see 2nd round Cedric Tillman. Hyatt is so popular on some boards. I heard Pat Kerwin and those guys talking, Jim Miller talking today. Hyatt may be gone.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that there's connections, and we have to really also understand when you have those type of connections with the coaches and the other people on the staff that know the personnel and know those young men in the draft prospects. Yeah, they're going to go and kind of rally for their guys. So yeah, I have to agree, and I see Ross is here.
Yeah, we'll bring Ross.
One other thing and one other thing I'd say about, you talked about pipelines, right? So one of the things that's just worked too, and you think about some of these roots and the way it goes deep, right? Brian Hartline over at Ohio State, him and Jeff Ireland, those types of ties. Jim Leonard wants to spawn a spell. Saints knew those why, that pipeline there. I think those things do matter, because every time you want to learn something about a prospect, when you have those types of things, I don't want to say farm system, but we talk about why do they take a lot of Ohio State guys or these things. There are ties there on why they need to know everything about a prospect that they take from certain schools, and they get these makeups from certain schools too.
Definitely.
I think the one thing when it comes to receiver, and Bob and I have talked about this the last few shows, is if the Saints were to take a receiver, I think we're all in agreement a day 1 wide receiver is kind of out of the question. It's not the biggest need unless somebody absolutely falls in your lap. But if the Saints take a receiver on day 2, I think that says a lot about how they feel with the rest of the room. And John alluded to it as well, with all these guys being free agents outside of a handful at the end of next year. Obviously, Traquan stayed around a long time, and Traquan has been a disappointment in a lot of people's eyes over the course of his career. I'm not naming names. There might be a guy in here. But nonetheless, there we go.
Guy.
This guy. And then And then, Michael Thomas's health, still a big question. Shaheed had a really, really strong end of last season, but can he make another jump? And then really after Traquan Smith, you have, Edwards is going to fight there for a slot. And then you have kind of the rotating cast of Saints practice squad guys, I guess, for lack of a better term, your Merritts, your Kirkwoods, and what have you. So I think if the Saints take a guy on day 2, it says a lot about how they feel moving forward with this group. And, we compare, at least I've compared it a lot to college coaches. When DA came in, a lot of these guys, especially offensively, were Sean Payton guys. And as we've slowly seen him bring in his own guys, not just to the coaching staff, but the team as well, are some of those receivers still Sean Payton guys that Dennis Allen's going to want to eventually bring in guys that fit his system and his mold a little bit better? I think if they take a receiver, it's going to be really telling.
Ross Jackson, welcome to our motley crew, my friend. I'm so glad. We are so glad to have you.
Grateful to be here. Stop it. Grateful to be here, y'all. Thanks so much for making this happen, and glad to be a part of the band here.
Ross, one thing I want to lead you in on. Obviously we've all been talking about the defensive line being a need. In your opinion, which of the two positions, defensive end, edge rusher, or defensive tackle, which of the two look deeper to you? And that's an important question because you're talking round 1 or day 2 needs here.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about deeper in the draft, I would probably go defensive tackles a little bit deeper for me, but there's a little bit of a caveat there. Your elite pass rushing interior defensive linemen are earlier in the draft, and then you've got a lot of sort of the kind of quintessential run stoppers that bring out the depth at the position toward the end of the draft. Now, there's still some of those underrated pass rushers, interior pass rushers down there. Kobe Turner out of Wake Forest, for instance. Maybe guys like Maro Ajomo coming out of Texas that could be in that sort of 5th round, 4th round, early day 3 area that still could be impactful. But for the most part, as you string that out, you're getting more and more run stoppers than you are pass rushers. But I think in general, the position's a little bit deeper than edge rusher.
Based off what I've seen, I definitely agree with that, and I think I kind of highlighted that in my first mock draft. Brendan, Kyle, John, do you guys feel the same way? And if you go for a defensive tackle, are you looking for pass rush disruption first, or are you looking at the fact that the Saints struggled so badly against interior rushing games last season?
Well, I could say that when I look at it, Colin Saunders is a run plugger probably, right? Nathan Shepard's a guy that can come in here and get after the passer. I'm curious because obviously Ryan Nielsen is no longer here, right? And so I don't know what Grantham philosophy is going to be. We could say, he's going to use a rotational approach. That remains to be seen. Your hope would be, could you get a guy, and you're not saying you can get Aaron Donald. Like, that would be a dream come true, right? Like a guy like that in this draft. I don't know if he exactly exists because Aaron Donald, but a guy that can just disrupt things, play all 3 downs for you, and is good at everything, right? And so I think what remains to be seen is, are they still looking at doing a rotation by committee? Even if he is a rookie, he's going to have to earn his stripes, and there probably is going to be some growing pains there, obviously, too. But I think it begs the question of what's the kind of vision there. And look, I think for a DT, the run defense fell off the face of the earth, right? It just was bad last year, but it wasn't even just that. Like, it's no disrespect, but I'm almost shocked at the contracts that Tuttle and Onyemata got, because Onyemata didn't play that well. Tuttle I liked. I think Tuttle did a pretty good job too. It's just even guys like Kentavious Street, I thought that they were just kind of underrated too. But for their 2 main starters, I thought they were pretty underwhelming and pretty disappointing. I mean, there was times even last year at training camp, Ross, we saw it that Malcolm Roach just blew it up. He was good. He's hadn't been as consistent, and I think that's the biggest thing that he has to work on is being consistent every down to down type of situation. But I think stopping the run's always going to be your priority, right? And I think the Saints have demonstrated we can get pass rush from the linebacker spot. We don't have to get it from the edge. We don't have to necessarily get it from the interior. But it would be nice if we could generate that pressure, because I know they have the blitzes They can get home with the corner. They can get home with the safety. The linebacker is important, but you don't have a Caden Ellis here now, as a third down pass rush specialist like we saw late in the year. So it's going to be interesting to see on all levels what this defense actually is able to look like and to be able to how they're going to be able to affect the passer next year.
Well, guys, I love Mozzie Smith. That's my guy, right? But if we talk about connections again, we talk about the Wisconsin connection, we got to look at Benton.
Yeah,
right?
he's a player.
6'4", a big body. You have that connection. You know what you're going to get. And sometimes Saints fans are like, oh, why didn't they go for the splash guy? Well, they go for the guys that they know that's going to be consistent, that fit their plan and fit the way the Saints play football. And Dennis Allen likes these type of guys. He's big, strong, tall. I think he's a plug-and-play individual. So if I have to do that type of bet, I will go with him or Brees, someone to that nature as well. But Mozzie Smith, that's who I believe will be great for the New Orleans Saints.
Preach, Kyle.
Yeah.
I'm a Mozzie Smith. I'm a Mozzie Smith fan. I'll say it. I'll say it for everybody in the back of the room, man. I love Mozzie Smith. I'll give you another one of those later round guys that has a connection to the New Orleans Saints too, and specifically new defensive line coach Todd Grantham, and that's Javon Dexter.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. Out of Florida. So he comes in 6'5", 310 pounds, if I remember correctly. He came in with like a 9.53 RAS score after running 4.88 on the as a defensive lineman at 300 plus pounds. This dude was moving, and he had a lot of explosive metrics too. 31-inch broad jump, 9'2" broad jump, 31-inch vertical jump. That makes a lot more sense. But
you said RAS too. You got to get those RAS scores right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Their RAS isn't good, then they're not getting drafted.
9.53. It's up there. That's a good one. And so, like, I look at Dexter and I think about, okay, so that's somebody that Todd Grantham helped, mold in Florida. I believe he helped recruit him as well. I think that's the way the timeline works out. And so there's a little bit of a connection there. There's a couple of other guys too, Rashad Torrance, Trey Dean, maybe later round safeties if the Saints decide to go that route, though that seems less likely with all of the attention they paid to that position over the course of the offseason. But when you look at those defensive linemen towards later on in the draft, Dexter's definitely one to keep an eye out on as well.
But not only Dexter, and I agree with you. Kyle and I both love betting out of Wisconsin. John, you pointed out that the pipeline with Wisconsin, runs pretty solid through New Orleans too. Love Siaka Ika from Baylor. Defensive tackle, I do believe is the deeper of the two positions. And Brendan and you and I have talked about it in recent weeks. If that were the decision, and you have a Mozzie Smith sitting there at 29, but the defensive ends are starting to dwindle a little bit. Is that what you go for? And then you bank on picking up a good defensive tackle, anywhere from midway through day 2 to early day 3. What's your thinking? We'll start with you, Brendan.
I think either way, when you get to 29, and obviously however the Saints have their board, it doesn't really matter if it's defensive tackle or defensive end. You have to address the whole defensive line. In terms of your question, do they grab a defensive end if they're falling off the board and then go defensive tackle later? Because I have my guy in the draft too, which is Keon White, that also scored very high, which you guys were talking about just being a New Orleans Saints thing to grab guys like that. I would like to see the Saints go defensive tackle and then defensive end because I think White would be a reach at 29, but that's just my own personal preference. If the thing pans out kind of like you were talking about, Bob, grab your defensive end first, grab your defensive tackle later, because defensive end is thin. And while the Saints do have depth there, a little bit of depth there, you and I have talked about it specifically. You have Granderson coming back. Passanio has been really underrated for the Saints over the last 2 years. Where is Peyton Turner in this whole thing? Is he going to have a breakout year in year 3, similar to how Marcus Davenport was for New Orleans? Or, I also think depending on how the Saints feel about Peyton Turner will also reflect how this draft kind of falls. Obviously, if you still feel good about Turner and it's kind of a coin flip, do you get a defensive tackle, defensive end in round 1? If you feel good about Turner, maybe it's a defensive tackle. If you don't, maybe it's a defensive end. At the end of the day, I think the first and second round pick at 29 and 40 both have to be defensive line, and you can flip-flop it however you want.
I think defensive end is definitely underrated need. And just because, look, we talked to DA at the combine, and I think it's no secret. He's in the same boat as Marcus Davenport. If he could just get in and have a full off season, like be there at the weight room, be at OTAs, and all those types of things, I think it'll speak leaps and bounds for Peyton Turner, because you got to remember, Carl Granderson's undrafted, and he's playing pretty much better than everybody, right? And
he took
again,
snaps from Davenport at the end of the season.
Yes, sir.
Totally did. And
took whole starts from him.
Davenport couldn't believe Davenport got paid what he did in Minnesota. And again, it wasn't even about the half sack. It's just that you're paying $13 million to a guy who's just hasn't been available. And look, I think Davenport can turn around, but Turner is in a real pivotal, and hopefully he has a Cesar Ruiz thing where the lights come on, he feels good about it where he's at, and then he just turns it around. But are you telling me that now day one that we're going to be excited and say, because I think Passignon has a bigger role going forward, right? I think he's underrated, like Bob had kind of mentioned and Brendan kind of mentioned too, but it's just, I think there's room to get one. And look, there's still pass rushers out there on the free agent market. And you got to remember, if you wait until after the draft, they don't count against the compensatory formula. So I wouldn't rule out if they don't look at drafting them, because they might want to address other needs. Like maybe it's linebacker, maybe it's another safety, because you can't ever have too many of those. Maybe it's that pass catcher we talked about. Maybe it's a running back. It's all those things. There may be an option outside on the table that we're just not seeing at the moment. And the Saints do have a pretty good bit of cap space right now. And that's not even going to count, their draft class to take up like $4 or $5 million, right? Or something along that lines. I mean, It's not much. They'll still have a good bit of money to sign somebody if they choose to. So I think thinking a couple steps forward, that could be a real possibility after the draft, that there's still a lot of premier talent out there for this team.
Yannick Ngakoue is out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if that's the case,
I like that.
So if that's the case, guys, do they look interior offensive line?
I think that's possible. I think that's likely. Actually,
drafter for you talking about drafting one or free agency?
Drafting.
Yeah, I just wrote about the interior offensive line today, actually, and I think that was part of the thing. There's a lot of pretty good ones that I like on there. I think at other levels, and once you start getting it around, the day three, it's just kind of like maybe there's some projects, all those types of things. But looking at guards and centers, I think there's a lot of things there, and I don't know if you look at it. I think the free agent side, there's only a couple. I can't remember who it is from Denver, but he's still a free agent. But I think his annual contract projection is supposed to be like $8-9 million. There's no way, right? And so I think there's some ideas and there's some things out there free agency wise that could happen, but I don't think you're going to get somebody that's a premier guy. And I still think everything that I understand, because Penning has to battle back from his Lisfranc injury, but he's expected to really highly compete for that left tackle spot. And I'm not saying he's a shoo-in to start, but I wouldn't be surprised if James Hurst takes the left guard spot. I'm just telling you, I think that's the kind of vision there, is that, maybe they're starting to think more tackle at some point, because they say Penning can be there. And we know Andres Pete might be good for a few games. He's just never been able to go a whole season. But I think of all these mad scientist type things that can happen for this team, and I don't rule anything out. And I just think that everything I've heard, they really like Penning. He's got to get on the field first, but I would see a scenario where they feel like they can go to veteran Hurst at left guard and then put Penning out at left tackle, and then you'll be set because McCoy's not changing. Ramczyk is who he is, and then you got Ruiz. So I don't know if you have that vision. I would see hard to draft an interior lineman early, maybe later, but you're not getting a good real quality guy if you wait to the later guys.
There's a couple guys that I actually like in the middle rounds. Some from smaller schools. If you're looking early, the kid from Florida, Torrance. I like Avila from TCU. But like John pointed out, they drafted Trevor Penning to take over the left tackle spot. So you have to expect that he has the inside track if he's healthy. James Hurst, I've always felt, is a better suited interior blocker anyway. He's a serviceable tackle, but he's a better guard. And you pointed, we all know the Andres Pete issue with injuries. I think it's very telling too that the 5th-year option for Cesar Ruiz has not yet been picked up, and they only have till May 1st or 2nd to do so. If they grab an interior lineman early, is that because they don't intend on picking up Ruiz's option and they wait to see if that year 3 development continues to play out? What about Ramczak's knee? Is that going to continue to hold up well enough for him to suit up every single week? Those are questions that only the insiders, inside that locker room and on that coaching staff, know as they go on into this draft.
I'll tell you another piece of that too. When they did the pay cut and the rework of Andres Pete's contract, he's now on a contract year as well.
Right.
So he's on the last year of his deal. Cesar Ruiz's 5th-year option, I mean, every day just gets more and more likely, and it seems unlikely that that's going to get picked up. And so I want to highlight those two things, but I also want to go back to John's point too about the idea of James Hurst and Trevor Penning being on the field at the same time. This was something that actually came up with Zach Strief last year at the Saints Hall of Fame golf tournament when he did some media availability there. Brooke Kirchhoff over at WWL had asked him about sort of, who's going to start at left tackle. And then that was when it was kind of James Hurst and Trevor Penning, who's going to be who before the Trevor Penning injury in the preseason. And then the follow-up question was, is there a chance that we see both of them on the field at the same time? And Zach Strief last year was saying, yeah, there's a chance that happens. And we all know what he was talking about when he mentioned that. And that's the competition that could have been created if Trevor Penning had not gotten injured in the preseason. How that could have, because he was on the trajectory to become the starter, if I'm recalling correctly. Like, everyone was feeling really confident about him at that point.
Yeah.
And so, like, if that would have happened, then all of a sudden the conversation would have become, is it James Hurst or is it Andres Pete at left guard? So there's still an opportunity, absolutely, I think, for that to happen, especially with Andres Pete's rework deal.
I'll ask you guys
I was going to
this.
tell you.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to piggyback off the $18.4 million, there's nowhere they're paying that. That's why they didn't tag any restricted guys. It costs too much. In the past, it's a no-brainer, right? Because the cost is, but you're paying $2, $4, and $6 million for players that you really shouldn't be paying $2, $4, and $6 million for, right? When it comes to Saints. But yeah, that 5th-year option, I don't want to get egg on my face, but there's about a 99.99% chance it's just not going to happen because it's too expensive for the Saints.
Look, guys, I wrote about it, age and availability, right? Age and availability. And right now, if you can't be available, you've got to possibly move on. And we've had too many instances where Andres Pete hasn't been available. Cesar Ruiz just talked about getting into sneakers.
Yeah,
able to wear sneakers. So we're talking about a few months away from possibly starting a game. I think interior is an area that they will need to address. I know we have some serviceable backups right now, but why not try to find somebody 2nd, 3rd rounds to be able to fill that void right there, or put them into that position. So that's the only way. Only thing that I see that we really need to address that area as well. So you can go defense in those early rounds, but I think also, like you said, Bob, there's some good guys from FCS and some Power 5 schools that will be available in those middle rounds that could possibly get into becoming one of those interior guys. Look, Carl Nix was one of those guys, right?
Teron Armstead.
Yep.
Armstead was a 3rd rounder from out of HBCU.
Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Arkansas Pine Bluff,
right, yep. So I mean,
there's another good one there too right now.
Yeah.
Huh?
What'd you say?
I said there's another one that could get drafted from Arkansas.
Well,
Pine Bluff.
yeah. So I spoke to Mark Evans yesterday, and I have an interview coming out with him. So yeah, so Mark Evans has had a conversation with the New Orleans Saints. I want to break that to you guys now. So he's had that conversation, and there's some interest in some interior guys.
Can I interest you in a player from East Michigan, small school with hyper athleticism and a high RAS score, and that's Canadian born, City
Wrote
So?
about him. Wrote about him.
I loved your piece
You had
on
me
him,
at a
Bob.
higher ass
Appreciate it.
Love that piece of it. Yeah, I look at him and I see City So as somebody is his name. SIDY is the first name, last name SOW, and
Say that again.
City So.
City So.
Tell me that ain't a fun name to say, too.
Say it ain't so for
Right.
City So.
So you
Like
think
a
about it.
Western, somebody in the Western days or something like that.
Yeah, for real. And he's coming out of one of those, small northeast western community college, state university technical, spots and all that stuff. And like 6'4", 323 pounds, 27 bench reps, shows the athleticism, shows the explosiveness, all the things that you like in these guys. And, he's got a little bit of a ways to go. I think he could be somebody that maybe competes if he were selected, but it's about pushing the guy in front of you more than it is about winning the job and then developing over the course of the season. I think he's somebody, in later rounds, along with like Chandler Zavala out of North Carolina State University, where the Saints used to have more connections than they do now. But still, like there are those other players out there that can be those draft and sort of stow away guys until the next season.
Nick Saldivari from Old Dominion's another kid I like a lot, too.
Yep. He's got that tackle guard swing ability as well. You can move him around the line. He's played on both sides and on the inside and outside. Like, I like that one a lot.
You guys
And I
will
would
be
say-
hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brendan. I was just going to say one more thing on the interior line is the
Do
fact that let's not forget that two of the guys that have had pretty good extensive playing time were both undrafted, right? And so Calvin Throckmorton started a whole lot of games for this team, got an extension. Lewis Kidd is another guy. I mean, he came in from nowhere. He was one of my favorites. I was like, he's going to make the roster. I just saw him. Now, the thing is, one of the things that I find interesting, I talked to him at the end of the year. They wanted him to add some weight to him, right? Because just to help him out and stuff. So I think it's going to help his outlook going forward. But I think that when you look at the interior line and some of the depth that they have, I don't think it's bad at all. I think that you look at Throckmorton and Kidd, if they can adapt more to Doug Marrone, who I think needs to get a lot of credit for what he does. Just being able to patch through an offensive line that looks different almost every week. But I think Kidd and Throckmorton are good options. And if they don't draft, I think it reiterates the fact that, hey, we really do like these guys too. And they might find another undrafted. They might find their next Throckmorton or find their next kid and if after the draft, if they got the more pressing needs too.
Love having Jari Evans back in the building for that development assist too.
Oh, yeah.
That's
And we can't forget
Sure.
about what McClendon Curtis, the young guy out of Tennessee, Chattanooga.
Like him, too.
I'm going to say, if you guys are tuning in today and you guys tune in with Bob and I throughout next week in those 3 long days of the draft, you're going to hear a ton from me about small school kids, whether it's FCS, whatever. Those guys can play, and I love watching tape on those guys year in and year out. Guys, I wanted to talk about this. I think we're all in agreement defensive line is the top priority for New Orleans going into the draft. We talked a little bit there about the interior of the offensive line. What's a position that might be a surprise need, if you will, for some of these fans? What's something that you think the Saints could do, whether it be at 29 or at 40 or in the third round, that you could see being a surprise to Saints fans, whether it's addressing a particular position or whether it's drafting a prospect that you really like?
I don't know if it's
I'll shoot from the hip. Yeah, go ahead, Ross. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if it's a surprise, but, I saw somebody listed as a sleeper position not too long ago, so maybe it is. But I think running back deserves a ton of attention in this draft.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the running back class, much like the tight end class, might be one of the best that we've seen in recent years. Tight end is at its absolute best right now in terms of this class. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Saints dip into that class just because of how dang good it is, but that doesn't mean you have to do it at 29 or 40. But I don't think you go running back at 29, but if a Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama is there at 40, for instance, who can come in and help you never have to change your playbook regardless of how many games Alvin Kamara potentially misses on suspension, and as he creeps closer and closer to the age of 30, what's the future of Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints is a question that unfortunately we'll have to start having larger conversations about in a year or two, because NFL teams also like to get a year early on those kinds of things. But at pick 40 is a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs on the board, and if so, how do you react to that? If a Bijan Robinson happens to fall in the first round because of the NFL's sort of volatile relationship with the running back position, I'll call it. That's the most political way I could have ever put it, y'all. That's the best that I can do. And then potentially at 71, there's a spot there too. So I feel like running back is one of those ones that I think everyone can look at and say, yeah, the Saints could address the position there, but it could happen earlier than some expect.
Mine would be linebacker, right? And so I think that third round pick could be. There's a couple of really good HBCU guys that I like. There's a Dorian Williams from Tulane. I don't know if it's going to be too early to pull the triggers, but I think there's a lot of that conversation just because the simple fact you lost Caden Ellis. You brought back, guys like Andrew Dow, who are more special teams. You still have Zach Bond, who nobody talks about anymore. DeMario is a little bit older, but again, what they found last year down the stretch is that Warner was your first and second down guy, good against stop and run, different situations. Then they bring in sub rush for Caden Ellis on third downs, and that worked a lot. I think, and there's also DeMarco Jackson I'm forgetting about too. There's still some good depth and promise there, but I just think that if you're looking at it and we're just saying, oh, there's all these positions, I think you can make cases for a lot of them, pass catcher, running back, all these different. I think linebacker and maybe safety is the other one that I think that we're probably just not thinking about. If you take a linebacker, I don't think you can have too many of them, but it's just one of those things. If not necessarily you're thinking, hey, let's get DeMario's replacement or not, but because DeMario is still playing strong, right? And look, I think him and Cam obviously are two of the backbones of this team, right? But I think at some point you're going to have to address some of those things, just because, like I pointed out with the wide receiver group, you have most everybody that's going to be free agent after this year. You got to start thinking a little bit next year and such, and seeing how things are going to work. But I think linebacker for me, and there's some pretty dang good ones that they could get around 71, maybe a little bit beyond that. But I think that would be a spot that fans probably wouldn't be thinking about as much, but I think would make a lot of sense.
Well, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what you said there. Two linebackers I've watched in HBCU landscape the past 2 seasons. That's Aubrey Miller Jr. and Isaiah Land. Isaiah Land is shooting up boards now. Saints have had a conversation with him. All right. Isaiah Land needs to get some. He's like Carl Granderson was a few years ago. He needs to bulk up a little bit, to be able to play the spot. But if you saw him in the Senior Bowl, he had 2 sacks in that game against the competition, other Power 5 guys, and he really looked excellent in that game. Now, Aubrey Miller is more of probably a pick that you would say will be an heir to DeMario. So Aubrey Miller is one of these tenacious young inside linebackers. He's smart. He's fast. He plays sideline to sideline, and he's a badass. I'm just going to be able to tell you like it is, man. I stood next to this kid in Texas, and he came out of the locker room barefoot pregame to kind of warm up, and he has that look. He has that ability to just intimidate opponents, and he was the SWAC Defensive Player of the Year, like his running mate from a year ago who went up to the Detroit Lions and had 8 sacks in 7 games, named James Houston IV. So we will be talking to Aubrey Miller on tomorrow, matter of fact, for HBCU Legends. So look out for that, man. But the shocker position to me, guys, I mean, you guys had all these boring positions, safety, linebacker, and all this stuff. The shocking position, if the Saints choose to get a kicker or a punter, let's be for real. That would be a shock to anybody.
No, wait. There's a difference between shock and enraging.
I will throw my draft in the trash if that happens.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen. But yeah, I think safety is one of those positions that you can can find some good depth in the middle rounds as well. So
I will say
That's
after Will Lutz's 2022.
That's what I'm
after Will Lutz's
saying,
2022,
Ross.
I'm not
You
saying that
feel
they
me.
necessarily have to draft one. It would
But
be
they
a
can
shocker if they
find-
did, but they could
Yeah.
find another one. There's a guy, Eddie Godina, who
got-
I spoke to just earlier on this week. I'll have a piece on him out on the site on Monday with my interview with him, but he's a great young kid. They spent a lot of time with him. He was here for the pro day that I covered here at the locally. And, the Saints have had conversations with him. He's had conversations with teams like the Eagles and the Cowboys as well, which is right up the street. He lives in Tyler, Texas, so he's like right there. But I happen to know he was born and raised in Riverside, California, and his favorite football player coming up was Derek Carr. Outside of the kickers that he really liked, like Justin Hughes, like Justin Tucker and Robbie Gould, he loves Derek Carr. And so I'm just saying. If the
Come, you
Saints
don't
want to
like
go
Alex
undrafted
Krewe,
free
man.
agent. Yeah. I know he's on the roster, but like nobody, it's just one of those guys
I
that
know.
never gets talked
Like,
about,
who?
unfortunately.
Yeah, the ones you mentioned on Twitter, and you say these guys, and like, who?
Right.
I'll tell you that, and I agree with you guys. I think the linebacker is an underrated need, and that's even taking into account my man crush on DeMarco Jackson that I have had since pre last year's draft.
Yeah.
I think DeMarco Jackson's a heck of a player, but he has to prove it. I think it would shock everybody if the Saints address defensive backfield, be it cornerback or safety, with one of their first 2 rounds, maybe even 3-round picks. But like I think you said it before, Kyle, or maybe it was you, John, you can't have enough good defensive backs. I think the position that could be drafted earlier than what people anticipate, though, is the running back position, like you said, Ross. Obviously, if Robinson drops to 29, or where they can trade up a couple spots to get him, that's a move you make. But even notwithstanding, I agree that the running back depth looks extremely deep. But everybody has guys that they like for their system. And again, we don't know what the Saints board looks like. Do they like a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs because they're looking at maybe replacing Alvin Kamara in a few years, or even when he's suspended this year? Do they want to bolster their interior running attack so they can utilize Kamara and Jamal Williams more on the perimeter? Do they want an inside-outside guy? Do they want a guy like Chase from Illinois? A little bit of do it all for the middle of the rounds. So that's my point. We don't know what Dennis Allen and what Pete Carmichael, how they view that running back board. So if they see a guy that they like, that they're afraid might not be there in the 3rd round or the 4th round, do not be surprised if the Saints grab a running back at 40 and make everybody say, just like they do every year, make everybody say, oh, so-and-so had them mocked for the 4th or the 5th round. Right. Exactly.
Benjamin.
I'm just saying that's the one that
I'm with you, man. I'm with you, but
He's been
I think
my
he can
guy.
do something.
Yeah.
I think
He
can
has
do
been
something.
Brendan's
Not to
guy
steal your
all year
thunder,
long.
That's awesome.
Not to steal your thunder, but I think he could be more in this offense, and that's just the thing where if they don't draft a running back, then I think they're legit. But they're always going to need a guy, right? They're going to get somebody undrafted. Look, Kyle, Darius Higgins. I'm really interested to see where he goes at HBCU. He blew everybody away at the combine. I don't know if he gets drafted, but man, I loved watching him at the combine. And so I just think there's some other guys where they can look at undrafted, and their track history hadn't been at the greatest over the past several years, but I still think the undrafted pool matters. And so, if they don't draft, even though there's a lot, and trust me, if they pass over Tyjae Spears and they have the chance, everybody's going to be set on blaze. So,
Torrance said
or something like
they're
that.
going to be headed down to Metairie and talk to you guys quite a bit. But no, seriously, man, before I get on off here, I like the fact that I think Spears could do a lot for this offense. And I think he'll be a good complement for the team. You guys saw him more, Ross and John, up close, and you saw him at the pro day as well. I mean, the guy has everything that you would need to kind of say, all right, if Kamara is going to be out for an extended period of time, he can be able to fill in and play, as well as Eno, So I think both of those guys have that ability. But one thing I would...
I was just saying, Tajay went from being a late day 3 pick to now he's like third round, being mocked at 71 and higher and stuff. That's just how crazy. And it's nothing. Like, he's running against stiff competition. I mean, even the bowl game, I mean, it was just no slouch that he was running against inferior guys. I mean, the guy is a real deal. I really am excited to see him.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm excited about, I love my Saints News crew. You guys look beautiful. I love my Tenacious Four. And you guys just keep up the great work. And I have to bounce off, guys, but have a great rest of the broadcast. And Ross, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
John, Bob, and Brendan, you guys keep on doing what you guys do as well as you do. And Saints fans, follow us on Saints News Network, and we're going to have complete coverage throughout the rest of the weekend and everything else. And I may grow some hair as a result of trying to get some things done. All right.
I got
Ross,
close.
I'll give you the
close,
formula.
Kyle.
I'll give you the formula. All right, guys. Y'all take care.
All right, homie. Good to see you.
I'll say this: Benjamin's been my guy. I hope. I hope he finds a spot on this team, and I bring it up every time we bring him up. I mean, he showed New Orleans firsthand back in week, was that 8?
Is that Thursday night football game?
Yeah, Thursday night football.
Yeah, that was tough to sit through.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I was in Las Vegas.
I was like, oh gosh.
I was in Las Vegas with the full-time job and running around doing this show, and so we're like walking, or we're driving to get dinner, and all you hear on the radio for that game was pick 6 while we're driving, and I was like, okay, whatever, and then not 5 minutes go by, it's another pick 6. I'm like, oh, they're just replaying the call, and then I get inside the restaurant, I see the TV, and I was like, oh no, that was okay.
Got him.
But anyway, yeah, Benjamin, I think could fit really well in New Orleans offense. So no, Bob, they're not taking a running back at 40 or 71 because I am on the Benjamin hype train. I've been the conductor of that ship for weeks now. When it comes for me, guys, that I think New Orleans could look at 40, and Ross kind of alluded to this earlier. The tight end class is really deep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the national media has made a mistake for the most part in some of these mocks where you see tight ends going to New Orleans and assuming that New Orleans needs like a Y tight end because Jawan Johnson killed it last year, obviously gets the contract extension, and I think he's found a good home and a good space to be the number 1 pass catching tight end for the New Orleans Saints. Now, I've also been on this show and said I think that Adam Troutman has a more defined role with the Saints and could, on the high side, be a Josh Hill type of player.
And because of that, the Bayou Blitz is going to get drug tested by the league any day now.
Oh, come on, man. Come on. No, but there's a guy that I really like in Darnell Washington from Georgia.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
At 6'7", he provides a lot of size in the red zone. I think that there's another level that could be unlocked for him as a pass catcher, but he's going to be a monster inline blocker, and I think New Orleans could desperately use that. So if the Saints see him at 40 and they like him as much as I do, I could definitely see New Orleans address tight end with one of the first 2 picks.
Yeah, I get a little irked when I see tight end at 29.
Same.
Because to me, like tight end at 29 is such a win later move to me. Like tight end in the first round is a very win later move. We'll see how it turns out. Like tight end has notoriously been, for about as long as I can remember, one of the hardest positions to translate to coming from college into the NFL. And some of these guys are pretty steady blockers. You look at like a Luke Schoonmaker, like later on in the, or excuse me, Jake Schoonmaker later on in the draft, coming out of Michigan. He's a little bit more of an inline guy, but that gives you some receiving prowess, has good speed, things like that. Maybe his transition's a little bit smoother if he lands in the exact same role at the next level, but that's very often not the case. Like you can love a prospect, but not necessarily love them for the team, right? Yeah. And so I think that when you look at tight end at 29, the thing that makes me so concerned about that is that you went out and you got Derek Carr, the guy you designated that you wanted to be your quarterback. You moved hell and earth last year to get 2 first-round picks so you can leave with the 2 guys you wanted in Chris Olave and Trevor Penning. You did that. You went out there, you got Michael Thomas to come back in 2023 for 1 more year. You've, gone out and gotten some of Derek Carr's guys and all that. And then you draft a tight end in round 1. Like, something doesn't fit here. One of these things is not like the other. And so when I look at like tight end in round 1, my thing about that is that, okay, well, that's a 2024, 2025, see what you got in 2023 pick. Whereas a defensive tackle, offensive lineman, an edge rusher, even a wide receiver to an extent, depending upon who that wide receiver is at 29, feels more in line with what the New Orleans Saints approach to this offseason has been thus far. Whereas tight end is kind of like, well, we'll see what happens in a couple of years with that position.
I mean, I only said tight end was as if Dalton Kincaid's there. That's my guy, right?
That makes sense, right? He's like your big pass catcher guy and stuff like that.
If he falls, that's the thing. And look, I'd say just to piggyback off tight end, I think even we talked about Taysom Hill earlier, but you got Troutman, you got Forstall, you got Lucas Kroll, who saw a little bit of action down the stretch. I'm really interested to see what Clancy Barone does. He's had some really good track history. He did extremely well with Kyle Rudolph in Minnesota. He's did way before that. Algie Crumpler back in the Falcons. Everybody who's a Saints fan for more than 5 minutes. Who knows Algie Crumpler? He used to him and Tony Gonzalez just kill the Saints. I couldn't stand Tony Gonzalez because he would just destroy the Saints every single time. Yeah. Crumpler did it before, right? But I just think that Barone can unlock some of the talent and the potential that some of these guys have. But look, again, I am only okay with a tight end pick if it's Kincaid. If he does fall, I don't think he'll make it probably past 20. I think Green Bay is probably a smart.
If the Packers pass on him, I'm walking to Green Bay. I'm walking to like,
hey, bro, come on, we got to talk.
This is the public's team here, okay? It's a public-owned team.
But again, if it does happen, that's the one guy that I would say, okay, that would be cool. Because I think there's something, and I wrote about it, I just think there's been a problem for the tight ends just ever since Jimmy Graham. You've tried to stack every tight end that's come through this building up to Jimmy Graham, and whether it's fair or unfair, it's Kobe Fleener, whether it's Ben Watson for you to say Kobe Fleener. Michael Hooman, I'm just gonna call him Hooman, whoever they've got, right? And it's just always in that shadow. And so, if you get somebody like that or somebody later, it could work. But at 40, if they use one, it's kind of like a what, unless it's Dalton Gate at 29, I'm not in favor of a tight end at all.
No, and Ross, you were beating the drum that I've been hitting most of the offseason. It's not that I'm against bringing in a tight end, especially a good two-way threat that could be a solid inline blocker and a legitimate threat as a receiver. But and look it up, folks. I've teased with statistics for the last couple of months now. You can look it up. Whether it's Travis Kelce, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, name the tight end. Outside of Kyle Pitts and Mike Ditka, no other rookie tight end has ever had a 1,000-yard receiving season. That statistic is just as scary if you go back to 900, 800 yards. I absolutely agree that the tight end spot, it's more of, as far as a receiving threat goes, it's certainly a wild card, a pull out of the wild card, and it's something that doesn't usually pay dividends right away. Dennis Allen needs to win now. Nobody is saying it out of the Saints organization, nor will they. But another 7-10 season, Dennis Allen is out of a job. I'm fairly convinced of that, because of that, he and the rest of those coaches, they need these first 3 rounds to be immediate impact players. And let's go back to Darnell Washington of Georgia. He's a guy that could be an immediate impact because he would do so as a blocker. And, doing so would certainly free up Juwan Johnson as a receiver a little bit. So, I think unless a pass catching freak like Kincaid falls to them at 29, I think it's out of the question that New Orleans spends the number 29 pick on a tight end. probably even the number 40 pick, unless it's a guy like Washington who they believe can be a day one starter, and they could line up right beside Penning and just run all day behind while he develops as a receiver. Outside of that, I wouldn't expect the Saints to address tight end until probably day 3. But I do think that it's an area of interest for the team. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have brought in Foster Moreau for a workout like they did. That's the way I view it too.
Yeah, and that's still a storyline. We're waiting to see exactly what we don't know what the end of that story is yet, right?
Yep.
Is that as John alluded to earlier, the importance of the compensatory pick period and the compensatory period, is that one of those signings that they end up making after the draft and after the compensatory formula period is done, and then moving him over to the NFI list to potentially activate him toward the latter half of the season, as John wrote about? Like, I think that that's still one of those things that we're watching out for, because they did all the other pieces. They went and got Brian Edwards for Derek Carr. Derek Carr really championed Jonathan Abram. They went and got him over on the defensive side, and then they brought in Foster Moreau. They were doing a physical, which means something was happening somewhere, some way. And so, we still need to kind of see how that all pans out. And maybe that, along with the Taysom Hill factor at tight end, that's still a part of the conversation as well, even though I think I wouldn't be surprised to see Taysom Hill, Seattle Seahawks Taysom Hill, or Taysom Hill versus the Seattle Seahawks version a little bit more early on in 2023. But still, I mean, he would still contribute outside of those 10 snaps at quarterback at inline or at tight end. So I think he ends up being a factor in that room as well.
Hey guys, are you going to be able to join us before round 1 kicks off next Thursday?
Maybe we can join in the same window. We could talk to J-Mac and them and see if we can stow away somewhere for 20 minutes on one laptop. Hey,
on the Wi-Fi for the facility too.
Maybe we'll do it on my phone. We'll set up a hotspot on the phone or something. That might be better.
No, it's usually pretty good, but there's some gree that goes into that sometimes. It's just like, I don't know what happened. So.
Well, the reason I ask is this, and folks, we teased it last week. The reason why Bayou Blitz is having our draft preview tonight, is because there won't be a show next Wednesday. Our show, so as it were, is going to be ongoing Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I asked you guys. I know, Ross, John. I know you'll be popping in and out from the facility. Do you think you'll be able to join us before the pick? And if not, the reason I ask is this: if not, I want to get your first round prediction now before we sign off.
Ooh.
Well, I'll try to jump on for sure.
I think so too.
Because I've yet to do my mock, because I only try to do now just one and done, right? And so
you're getting old, John, when you're saying that.
I am. I know. I just usually do.
I don't want to hear it. I got that, and I got these going on. Yeah, I don't want to hear all of it.
I'll tell you what. You could ask me for my first round prediction right now, my first round prediction in a week, or my first round prediction 3 months ago, and it's all the same answer. So I have been consistent.
All right, well, give it.
Oh, I'm Team Mozzie Smith at 29. Michigan State, Mozzie Smith. I think defensive tackle is a spot where they absolutely need to be able to go.
Yeah.
I think the big guys, big guys win games. And I think to your question earlier too, Bob, when you were talking about, do you go for a guy that improves the run game or do you go for a guy that improves the pass rush? I think you go for the guy that's going to help the pass rush. And I do think that Mozzie Smith can help both. But
I agree.
Here's why I say that you go for the guy that can help the pass rush. Colin Saunders, if we think about him as the more closely related replacement to Shai Tuttle than David Onyemata, Nathan Shepard, the more closely related replacement of David Onyemata than Shai Tuttle, right? I think that's pretty safe to say. Nathan Shepard, David Onyemata, roughly around the same if you look at all the advanced metrics when it comes to how you produce in the run game, run stops, run stop percentage, run stop win rate, things like that. Similarly, Shai Tuttle and Colin Saunders actually literally tied with one another for, I think it was 41st at run stop win rate and run stop percentage. But then you look at pass rush win rate, pass rush productivity, there's a big jump. Nathan Shepard was 16 spots better. He was in the top 10 when it came to pass rush win rate. You look at Colin Saunders, he was 30 spots better than Shai Tuttle there. So you remain consistent in terms of the individual run game production, which does not translate to team run game production. I understand. But in terms of what those players bring in terms of their acuity as individual defensive players against the run, they're remarkably similar to both David Onyemata and Shai Tuttle, but where they differ has been their pass rush productivity. So you look at that, and then you also take into consideration, they were 24th in terms of yards against the run, but they were 5th in terms of points allowed in the NFL when it comes to the defense. And the reason why I bring that up is because oftentimes productivity in the run game doesn't translate to points. That's where in today's NFL the passing game comes in. Yeah. So if I'm tasked with maintaining my number 2 pass yardage defense or improving my 24th ranked run yardage defense, I'm going for the former, and I'm doing everything I can to consistently help out my secondary and keep passes from being caught in the end zone, because that's what puts points on the board in today's NFL. Now, that's eventually going to shift back to the run game. We've already watched that start to happen over the course of the past 2 years in particular. But as of right now, I'm bolstering myself against the run. And if I can be a top 20 run defense, I'm good. And then I'm going to bolster myself against the pass and try to maintain my top 3 standing, top 5 standing there. So I'm all about bolstering the pass rush. And I think that's where Mazi Smith is not as proven as a pass rusher before 2022 as he was a run stopper, but I believe has more potential, more untapped potential as a pass rusher than as a run stopper based on 2022. So I like where the trajectory that he's heading and how I'd be able to build off of that. So Mazi Smith's a prediction for me at 29.
Hey, you know what? I love Smith for all the reasons that you just said, and I think he has a hell of an upside as a pass rusher. He's extremely agile on his feet for such a big guy. He wasn't asked to do a lot as an interior pass rusher before last year because they had those 2 monster edge rushers the 2 years before that people forget about. So all he had to do was tie up blockers and leave those guys outside, and man on man. Responsibilities. So I think Mazi's a plug and play guy that's going to contribute on early downs for sure, with a heck of an upside as a pass rusher. And you guys talked about the coaching. Ryan Nielsen being gone is, I think, a huge blow to the Saints defense. I like Grantham, and we'll see we'll see how the defensive line interacts with his coaching style. But I do think that Mazi Smith is the type of guy that at the very least you're going to get a run defense production out of immediately, and with good coaching, one heck of an upside as a pass rusher.
Yeah, and if Grantham maintains what we've seen from him at Florida and Alabama and other places, it's attack.
Yes.
And he's a defensive line specialist. That's what he did as a coordinator, all of that. And so he wants to attack. We know Dennis Allen to be an aggressive defensive play caller. I bet he would love to do some more attacking as well. We see the type of stuff he pulls out on third downs and the blitzes and blitz packages that he's willing to build. Certainly we saw that with him as a defensive coordinator last year. I think they got hindered a little bit with never having his starting secondary out on the field, and so not having the same level of trust of guys that could bail and also cover. But I love what Mazi Smith could potentially bring to this New Orleans Saints defensive line. I love what Kalijah Kancey could bring to the defensive line too, but I'm a little bit less. There's a lot of outliers in this year's NFL draft class between Bryce Young, who could go as early as 1. Kalijah Kancey could be a first-round pick. Tank Dell's out there in that category. Nolan Smith is in that category. There's a lot of guys in that category, but I'm not going to bet on something that hasn't worked yet in the NFL. I'm going to bet on the thing that we've seen work a million times.
Yeah.
Well, let's close the show like this, guys. Kind of asked it with first-round predictions, but I'll tweak it a little bit, Bob. And let's say dream scenario for the Saints at 29 and at 40. If you guys were sitting in the Mickey Loomis chair and you guys could have it any way you want, board falls realistically, okay, let's not get crazy, but the board falls in a realistic way. I don't want to hear anybody saying like, "Oh, Bryce Young to New Orleans at 29,"
right.
But
which I wouldn't, by the way.
Exactly. But what would it be for you guys? The dream scenario for the Saints on Thursday and Friday.
First 3 rounds, no particular order, but I think we all agree Mozzie Smith is, you're going to hear his name called on in round 1. I want Mozzie Smith, Cedric Tillman, and Isaiah Foskey. That's dream scenario for me.
Nice.
Yeah, either Tillman or Foskey tumble it. They'll both be available at 40, I think. But one of those guys tumble to the 3rd round, or the Saints make a little bit of a move up. But getting those 3 guys out of round 1, and I get my running back right off the bat in day 3. That's a dream scenario for me.
John,
Go ahead, John. I just did a lot of talking.
I still think. Again, I've been on the Dalton Kincaid train. I don't think that's going to happen. Right now, I think the defensive tackle is Maisie Smith or Brian Breesy. I think those are the 2 that I lean towards most. I don't know if Gibbs will fall. I don't know. Obviously Bijan this not going to fall. I just look at all of it unless they do something wild like a wide receiver, like a Jalen Hyatt. I don't know. That could be a potential possibility. But, I just, again, all of my want-to picks, I want them to take a defensive tackle. I wanted them to do it because I just think that's the most pressing need. You don't go from having one reserve future guy on the roster, sign 2 free agents, and bring one back and say, okay, we're good, we're straight.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just not going to happen. And look, I still think I don't think they'll maybe double down. That could be a possibility, but they also will be pretty active in the undrafted process. So it's got to be Maisie. It's got to be Brian Breesy. I think it's one of those 2 that realistically happen, and I'd be happy with both of them. I don't know if there's one that they take it. I feel, without the one Ross was pointing out earlier that I would be upset at. I think they're going to be guys that are going to prove themselves and do a lot. And I think having vets like Shepard and Saunders in here are going to only help them out. And you bring back, Malcolm Roach. I think some of the pressure's off there, but look, let's make no mistake about it, that whoever they take is going to be expected to be a contributor. I think their first 3 picks, when you talked about the pressure being on DA, I think their first 3 picks have got to be major contributors this year, no matter how you slice it. So if they're taking a luxury pick or something, I just don't think that vision lines up with the need to win and to come out and to dominate this division. Because look, I think we didn't even really talk about it, but I like what Atlanta's done this offseason. I kind of like what Carolina's done. They still need quarterbacks, and I still not sold on Desmond Ridder, but I still think that there's some things that they've done that maybe makes the race where you said the Saints were definitely going to win the NFC South, and okay, maybe they can have some competition now. And so I think that's the best way, but nobody's going to believe Tampa's going to be in it, right? But again, DT for me, Maisie Smith, Brian Breesy, those are 2 I would go for.
If I'm doing 3, my top 3 picks here, Mozzie Smith at 1 or at 29. Trade all the way up to 1 to draft Mozzie Smith. Is that realistic enough, Brendan? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so. No problem. Go ahead and tweet that out. This dream scenario.
Ricky Williams time.
Right. Mozzie Smith at 1 and then done for the rest of the draft. No, Mozzie Smith at 29. I happen to know that at least one person high ranking enough to matter within the New Orleans Saints facility wants 1, if not 2 playmakers in this year's draft. So with that being the case, and with that additional context, I'll say Jahmyr Gibbs at 40, if he makes it there. I'm being a little bit, I'm really, that might be a little bit of a stretch for the dream scenario, but I think it's realistic enough to say Jahmyr Gibbs at 40. He is 199 pounds and 5'9" after all. Another outlier. And then in round 3, I love the Isaiah Foskey pick. I love that pick. But just to give something a little bit different, I'll throw in at 71 instead. I'm trying to think back to like some of the like more recent mocks that I did to where I just got weird in the early rounds and stuff like that. You know what could be really interesting is if they decide to go and double up at defensive tackle early or on the defensive line early. That's why I like the Isaiah Foskey one so much. Yeah. But what if a guy like Siaki Ika, who's a little bit more of a nose tackle, and we've talked about them having to struggle at tight end trying to replace, effectively trying to find Jimmy Graham since Jimmy Graham was gone. The Saints on the defensive line have struggled to find a big body guy to clog up the middle since they traded away Malcolm Brown. They have never successfully replaced that. And that was a big part of what made them successful against the run. So what if they go super active at defensive tackle early on, and they go with a guy like Mozzie Smith early, who could help you, as we've discussed, kind of all around, a Jahmyr Gibbs at 40, then a Siaki Ika at 71, which then frees them up to just live long and prosper at 115, 145, and all the other places where they're probably gonna move up. I like the Isaiah Foskey one a lot better, but just to throw another name out there, what about Siaki Ika at 71?
And in my first mock, which I did like in the third week of March or something like that, I went Foskey in the first round because, as I explained with my edge rusher defensive tackle logic before, went Tillman in the second, feeling that Ika would still be there in the third, and that's what I did with my third round pick. The exact logic that you explained. I do believe, and all of us on the panel have talked about addressing defensive tackle over and over and over again, but that we do expect them to not be finished at the defensive end position, whether it's in the draft where they wait and grab one of those edge rushers that are still sitting out there in free agency. I think one of those two scenarios are going to happen for this team.
You know what? I'm going to offer an alternate universe one here. Mozzie Smith at 29, Felix Anudike Uzama.
I like him
at 40, and then let's just show some love for the hometown and say Tajay Spears at 71, right? You're looking for another guy that can run the routes, that can do everything out of the backfield. Tajay Spears could do that. Over 60 missed tackles for us last year, over 1,000 yards after contact last year. He was incredible. And as John highlighted earlier, was not incredible just against subpar, competition. Like, he did it at the highest level. And so the reason why I mentioned Felix Anudike Uzama is that, and it also being an alternate universe, is that he doesn't fit the Saints prototype. But with the evolution of quarterback, more and more mobility at the position, and a potential for 2, if not potentially 3 young quarterbacks in the division as the Saints move forward here over the course of the next couple of years, having a speed rusher that can stick his foot in the ground and go the other way, away from the pocket to chase down the quarterback that broke contain, that's something the Saints don't have on their roster right now. That's kind of what you might have hoped that Zach Bond was going to be, but then they wanted him to be an off-ball linebacker instead. And so you go and find sort of that pass rush specialist that has the speed and can do a lot of different things that the other guys can't do. That's one of the things I like about Felix Anudike Uzama. So that could be an interesting, and I would admit, dream scenario for me to where I would love that run of 3.
I didn't give the third round pick, but a guy I just mentioned before we get out of here, A.T. Perry from Wake Forest.
Yes, sir.
We both love him. All of us love him.
I don't know. He might be a day 2. I mean, a second round pick, but A.T. Perry is probably one of my favorite wide receivers in this draft. Third round pick. I'm 71. I wouldn't be mad about it.
Yeah.
At all. So Look him up if you don't know anything about him. He's a stud.
I was looking him up. Look at the Saints News Network. One of our writers did a piece on him 2 days ago.
That's what I meant, is look it up.
A.T. Perry, S.I. You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
The hearing aid is next.
Oh, man. Hey, shout out my Carolina boys. I love my North Carolina schools, man. So with mine, I guess you can count it as a North Carolina school. You guys already said them, so I'm kind of just stealing. Is Brian Barisi out of Clemson? Defensive ACC defensive freshman of the year. They think they call it rookie of the year, but I hate that.
number one recruit coming out of high school in the country.
Yeah. Would really like him there. I already mentioned Keon White out of Georgia Tech is a guy I really like. I don't know if it's quite a reach at 40. Him and Mox is everywhere. I would really like him there, though. He kind of fits that mold and prototype. And Bob and I talked about it last week. It's going to be like drafting Davenport or Turner again in terms of size and weight. So I know that's not a prototype that Saints fans want me to say, but he certainly fits that mold. Third round guy. Spears would be fun just because hometown guy, but of course I've already professed my love for Eno Benjamin on this show.
You can't turn your back on him now.
Exactly. I can't do it now.
He's listening to the show. He says, Brennan Boylan, you cannot take that back.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot do that to me. I don't know. I don't think there's a tight end outside of Washington I'd really like to be in a New Orleans uniform, and he's not going to be there at 71. Throw any receiver. I think receivers underrated. I would like to see them address linebacker and free agency with some of that money that we were referring to earlier. They're going to have some left over. That was probably my biggest disappointment from the Saints free agent class, was just the inability to address that spot. Because you lose Ellis, and then as much as I like DeMarco Jackson being an App State kid, little undersized. I love my undersized linebackers. Sam Mills was like my first love of football. For being out all of last year, I don't know how comfortable I feel if he needs to step into a position because of injuries or something. So linebacker, receiver, I guess in the third round. I don't have one in particular.
Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice out of SMU.
That's what Ross said. Let's go with Ross. Is a smart guy. I've followed Ross for a while. Ross is a smart guy. Let's go with that one. Oh, man. Well, guys, we will certainly have you guys back and welcome you back with open arms on Thursday. But for the crazy Saints fans that don't already, because if we're talking about follower count, the two people on the top of this screen, not nearly comparable to the two on the bottom half of this screen. So where can the world follow you guys on the World Wide Web?
Just give them your Twitter accounts.
Yeah,
we're gonna start doing that.
You can follow Ross at
Boylan.
I retweet everything Ross and John say, so follow me and follow them at.
Nice little aggregator.
There you go.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, easy. John J. Hendricks. It's Hendricks, just like Jimmy, not like the gin. And that's the best way I could put it. And then obviously Saints.media or Saints News Network, si.com/NFL/Saints. You can catch me on doing a lot more video stuff coming in soon. Cat's not out of the bag yet, but hopefully some big things coming this year for Saints News Network and all that good stuff. But appreciate all the support and follows. And I'm so sorry for spoiling your game. Probably will spoil your draft pick too, just because.
Oh, right. We have to do that every year. John lives in the future, guys. He spoils everything. No, see, the thing is, and I understand the pain of people who follow John, because before you and I started working together, I was like, I have to mute this guy. I have to mute this guy on draft night. I have to mute this guy on Sundays because this is awful.
Block me, mute me.
And then we started working together, and it was grand because I would figure out all this stuff very early. Like I remember the first draft we worked together, we were like 5 picks ahead of everybody else, and it was wonderful. But yeah, when we weren't working together, man, it was like, all right, draft day mute, free agents mute.
Smart. Just don't block me, please. You can mute me, don't block me. I have nothing wrong.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola, NOLA, Locked on Saints Podcast, and of course over at si.com/NFL/Saints.
Gentlemen, thank you both for taking some time out of. I know your schedule has been crazy too, so I appreciate you taking a couple minutes out tonight. And I know we'll be talking before now on Thursday, but we'll definitely see you on Thursday. And thanks again for your terrific insight tonight.
Pleasure to be here.
Problem. Yep, always. Definitely appreciate you guys.
Oh, anytime.
Bob, where can they follow you, and where can they follow you and your alter ego, Angry Bob, which we haven't seen in quite a while, but that could change on draft night.
Kyle, you know what? Kyle is usually the one who loses his composure on draft night. I'm the one that loses my composure, and I warned him. I warned him 2 years ago. You do not want to put me on a live halftime show, but he insists on continuing to do it. So that's the best time to find Angry Bob is halftime. But folks, you can follow me, Bob Rose, over on Twitter at BobbyR2613. I got that confused. Bob Rose on Facebook, at BobbyR2613 on Twitter. Follow all of us at the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter. And of course, we stream all of our work and all of our video as well through the Bayou Blitz Facebook page and at Bayou Blitz Pod on Twitter. If you're not already following any or all of those things, what's wrong with you? And please shuttle your friends, shuttle your family members, new football fans, old football fans. Send them our way. We educate and entertain with the best of them.
You didn't show your age there, confusing your Facebook and Twitter at all. But all right, guys. For me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. Follow my production company, Bottom of the Mug Productions, at BOTMPROD on Twitter. That's a mouthful. And for these three guys, definitely follow them throughout the draft, though I'm not writing with Saints News Network anymore. I know these guys all produce amazing work. Ross, haven't had a chance to do it in person or virtually in person yet, but welcome to the crew. Thanks, I sit
buddy.
back and I retire and they go and, they hire the all-star. They all hire the multi-time MVP to replace me. And so, but nonetheless, really excited to see you get added to the group. These three guys are going to do tremendous work throughout the rest of the week. Bob and I obviously will be here Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So get your coffee pots on, and we'll be looking forward to seeing all of you guys yet again on Thursday for a night that could alter the franchise's path.
Bob's demeanor.
Ross, it doesn't take much. You'll learn that.
Man, I thought I roasted Bob good, but Ross, man, let's tag team it. Bob, you're a WWE guy. Ross and I are about to become tag team champions of the world.
That's right.
Yeah,
we're your heel now, buddy. We're your heel now.
It's all good. I got John in my corner as my manager, and then before I know, he's sliding you guys to steel chair.
That's right. Yep.
Perfect. Well, guys, we'll see you next week for the Bayou Blitz on a different night. We're going to be here on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Until then, find peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you next week for the Bayou Blitz podcast.
Night all.